one of the things we always do at a Body Soul event is light our candle. And Marion used to talk, Marion Woodman, the founding member, visionary for Body Soul work with her co-hosts Anne Skinner and Mary Hamilton. Marion would always speak to the candle as the light of consciousness. So it's interesting, we're lighting the light of consciousness, but we're also lighting an ancient symbol of fire. And communities right across the world were dependent on fire. And the meaning and the holder of fire was so rich that it was believed by the Greeks it was up in heavens, and Prometheus had to go and try and steal it for us as humans. In the Irish and Northern European, it's in the hands of Bridget. And before that, her wisdom is settled into Losser, which means flame. So it's a very ancient symbol, and it's about our human life needing that power and fire of transformation and heat. So we're going to light our candle today, aligning ourselves with each other and with the fire of Bridget. So just holding the light, your own light that you've lit, and aware of all the lights of those of us around today, right around the world, as though there's an arc of light from the west of Ireland, where I am, right across north and south, from here to India, to Australia, up north and again to Canada, back to Northern Europe, Denmark, Finland, and back, a circle of light. When we light the fire of Bridget, we call our soul back home. When we light the fire of Bridget, we call our soul back home. So I'm going to do a little, we might call it a meditation, but just a centering exercise for a moment, just to bring yourselves present in your body. So we're not too drawn into the screen. We're also in our own personal bodies. So feeling wherever you're sitting, where the gravity is, the pull of the earth. If it's down in your bum, towards the ground. If it's in your back, towards the back of the chair. Whatever is supporting you, just feeling that connection with the earth's gravity. And yielding a little bit into it. Just letting go that tiny bit. See what it's like. I can just lean into what supports me. And as you do that, you might be aware that there are little shifts inside. You might want to even shift your body a little bit to get that support a little bit more. You might notice your breath. The space for your breath maybe has got a little bit bigger. And then with soft eyes, allowing your eyes to wander around the space. You may go towards the light outside, or you may be drawn towards your fireplace or some objects in the room, just allowing your head to circulate from one shoulder to the other. Not particularly stopping, but just allowing yourself to see what's around you in your space. And again, being with yourself after that little exploration and just noticing again how that settles you even a little more. This is your space where you are breathing. where you're resting, where you're participating. And as you come back and notice the screen, again, not stopping with the screen, but just being aware that it's part of what's around. It's part of your environment, one you can tune into and one you can take your eyes away from and rest. And again, noticing your breath, that may give you a little bit more space, may relax you a little more, may just help to bring you present to yourself. And as we're present to ourselves and to each other, let's also be present to the ancestors, those who've gone before us, some of whom may have died quite recently through this pandemic, some much, much older. Just being aware of our line, where we hail from. And whatever blessings come today, may they go back to heal the ancestral line and forward to the next generations. So I'm going to read a poem for us. What strikes me about the poem today is the year it was written, 1943. They still had 2 years to wait before the war would be over. Do you know what I was? How I lived? You know what despair is. Then winter should have meaning for you. I did not expect to survive, earth suppressing me. I didn't expect to waken again, to feel in damp earth my body able to respond again, remembering after so long how to open again in the cold light of earliest spring. Afraid, yes, but among you again, crying yes, risk joy in the raw wind of the new world. Afraid, yes, but among you again, crying yes, risk joy in the raw wind of the new world. And so it gives me great joy to welcome Mary today as our guest to share this wonderful knowledge that she's accumulated for years and years now. Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Marion, and it's a very great pleasure to be here with everybody today, and particularly members of the BodySoul community internationally whom I haven't met for many, many years, and to be introducing the traditions of Imbolc and Bridget, maybe to people who were not aware of them before. It's a great privilege to be able to do that. So where do we begin? The important thing to say about Imbolc is that it is a spring rite, and spring rites take different forms in many different countries. In Ireland, Imbolc is now associated with the figure of Bridget. And so why do we associate it with Bridget? Well, one of my favorite stories is this one. She at one point went to live with her father. She'd been farmed out at an early age because they couldn't put up with her shenanigans. But she went back to live with her father. And when she went back, she kept giving away all the food. So the father said he couldn't put up with this anymore. And he decided to sell her into slavery. And so he went to the king and left her in a carriage with his sword. And a leper came along and he was hungry. And so Bridget gave him the sword so he could sell it and he could buy some food. And so the father and the king came back out thinking everything was a done deal and saw that the sword was missing. And so they said to Bridget, well, you know, what's wrong with you? Where's the sword? And she said, well, I gave it to a leper because he was hungry. And the king said, now, come on, I'm not going to be married. I'm not going to buy this woman. You know, she's going to be a very hard person for you to sell and an even harder one for me to buy. Because do you know what? This woman can neither be bought nor sold. And in that story, the woman who can neither be bought nor sold, she was a virgin. And in Irish, a virgin means somebody who's intact, who is inviolate, or in the words of Marion Woodman, she is somebody who is one unto herself, complete in herself. And so one of the reasons we're returning to Bridget and all the traditions surrounding the spring rites of old Europe has to do with Adrian Rich. Adrian Rich, you know, a poet whom you might remember, wrote a book called The Dream of a Common Language. And we often wondered, what would that language be? And I'm proposing that the language is the language of the body, because that's what we all have in common. Whatever our differences, religious, political, economic, or whatever, we all have in common a language of the body, which is expressed in rituals, it's expressed in stories, and it's expressed in artifacts. And today we're going to explore some of those rituals and the artifacts that are associated with the spring rites. And I will, you know, propose that they are a common language of, you know, that can be expressed throughout the world. Now, what does the word Imbolc mean? There are many different interpretations, and of course, the scholars argue about these things. One possibility means that it's in the belly. And I know that the body soul people love to talk about being in the belly, and we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about that. The other possibility is it's purification. A lot of washing took place and the farm tools were cleared for the harvesting. Or it could be the bellows, you know, firing the bellows in order to stir up the fires. Or it could be related to milk. And in this case, it would have been sheep's milk because, you know, the food was running out after winter and the sheep were the first to give birth to the lambs. And so sheep's milk became very, very important. But in the belly, the word Imbolc means around or about, and bullock means belly. And some people suggest that this is an ancient ritual of going around the arable field, which was the symbolic belly of the mother goddess. And this ritual was undertaken before the field could be tilled and the seed would be sown. Now, there are different dates for Imbolc. We have traditionally in Ireland, it's the 1st of February, but in the old calendar, you know, between the Gregorian and the Julian calendar, and then there's the lunar calendar, and then there are so many other calendars. Some people thought it's still hold the 11th of February. The lunar calendar is the 15th. But then in Northern Europe, spring doesn't arrive until the beginning of March. So there's a lot of flexibility as to when we might celebrate it. But the one thing that I found in recent years about the stories of Imbolc and Bridget is that the stories of Bridget actually go way, way, way back in Irish history. Long before any figure called Bridget or even the word Bridget entered the country. And one of the first persons to use to use some of the artifacts would have been the Cailleach. The Cailleach, which means the mysterious one, Santana, the old woman, the woman with the cloak. There are many different interpretations as to who the Cailleach was, but she was the great creatrix, or she was the one who shaped the landscape. And the Cailleach has counterparts all over the world. we were told, for instance, when we were growing up, why is the cloak associated with Bridget? And we were told, well, she wanted to, build a monastery, and she went to a miserly old man or somebody and asked him for land. And he says, I'll give you as much land as your cloak can cover. And of course, her cloak stretched out and out and out and went to cover the Curragh of Kildare. But in fact, the cloak is the most ancient symbol of female creation. It represents the womb, and it is from the womb of the female that the world has been created. And so the Cailleach and many of the traditions associated with the Cailleach are now associated with Bridget. For instance, the Cailleach at the beginning of spring would go down into Carriveckan, a place in Scotland, and shake her cloak and wash it in the whirlpool. And this was the way of regenerating the world. So regeneration is a huge key of the living traditions. But there was another figure associated with Imbolc, and I suspect that she was there even before Bridget, and her name was Lasser. Lasser it means, as Marion said, is a flame, but it also means the light woman. And certainly in the Scandinavian traditions, it's the midwife, the light woman, who brings the babies into birth. And it says explicitly in the Lives of Bridget that, she had performed some favors for Lasser. She didn't have enough food to feed Patrick, and so Bridget expanded the food, as she often did, a little bit like Jesus, three loaves of bread, don't worry, here's 12. And in return for that, Lasser gave her church to Bridget. And of course, Lasser was also associated with sheep. And so the traditions associated with Saint Bridget, as we know them in Ireland, are often sanitized. But once we begin to look at the ancient traditions and look at the artifacts, we see a very, very different kind of a story. Some people call her a goddess, some people call her a saint. I don't worry about those kind of things, because one of my favorite stories is one time I was working in Canada and we had a céilí in the evening. And I looked around in the céilí and there was an 85-year-old Irish nun who'd emigrated to Canada at an early age. Who was she dancing with? Only the head of a local witches' coven. And there were the two of them having a great time in the céilí in the middle of the floor. And so if Bridget and her cloak can encompass those kind of traditions, we're all going to be doing very, very well. So there's three ways in which I think we can relate to Bridget. We can relate to her traditions and her symbols as cosmic in origin: heaven, earth, and what is under the earth. And we can relate to her in a communal way, because the sites that are now connected with Bridget are the microcosms of the world. In every site connected with Bridget, there's the tree of life, there's the well, there can be a serpent, although Patrick was said to have banished the serpents from Ireland, but we'll talk about that again in a minute. Sometimes there are caves at the site. So the Bridget sites, and there are healing stones, and sometimes there are chairs. And of course, I suspect that the chairs are where the female jurists, like Brí Brethach, because Bridget has many different names. She was, Bridget of the Judgments. She was Bridget of the Provider, the Bruiga, or she was Bridget Ambui, the one who took care of the outlaws. That's the one I like best. Anyway, as I said, the chairs can be a symbol of them. And in some traditions, particularly the Hebrew traditions, those chairs are called the mercy seats. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about is how the traditions of mercy, or how the traditions of Bridget encompass mercy. And as you know, all of the main religions of the world, the monotheistic religions at any rate, are related to sacrifice. I think Bridget's focus on mercy offers a very distinct difference to which we need to pay attention. And so today we're going to be looking at three major artifacts associated with Bridget. One will be the kris, which is the belt. The second will be, and that is a personal, you might say, that's the artifact we use for our personal alignment. The second one is the cross, and that's the tree of life. And that's the way we focus on communal alignment. And the third then would be the cloak, which is the cloak of heaven. And the cloak absorbs the dew from the tree of life. Plato called it the cloak of stars. Others call it the belt of heaven. Female divinities generally are associated with the cloak of heaven. And finally, we're going to talk about or bring in snowdrops. So the last thing I want to say just to begin with is, are we setting up a new worship of Bridget? Are we looking for a new religion? And of course, my answer to that is absolutely no way. What we're looking for is alignment, not worship. We're focusing on what Bridget proclaimed rather than the proclaimer herself. It's not about setting up a new cult. We are asked to align our bodies. We're asked to align our communities, our basic intentions with our communities. And we're asking ourselves to be in some kind of alignment with the cosmos and the needs of the cosmos, especially at this time of the world when we are living in such trauma and pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for that stimulating introduction. It's got us all going. So now we are handing over to Mary, who's going to take us to have some time with the symbol of the Chris. Mary.
I think Benny is going to begin by showing us some of the images of the Chris. This one in particular, this first one, is an ancient statue where the Chris is around the hips, and you can see there are 3 buttons, which is very significant, 3 large buttons, which I'll talk about in just a little minute. Okay. The second image is of another kind of a Chris, which is a painting by Bonnie Hicks of a woman holding on to a birthing belt as she prepares to give birth. And this is in the Navajo tradition. It's another image of a kind of a Chris and a kind of a use of the Chris. Thank you. This image actually goes all around the world. You know, when we began our Bridget festivals, we didn't have very much of an idea as to what the Chris might have meant, but over the years we've been able to find out. And in this image, the Virgin Mary is giving her girdle to doubting Thomas, because do you remember, Thomas didn't believe that Jesus had been resurrected. Well, he didn't believe that Mary had been assumed into heaven either. So she had to come back and hand him down her girdle, which she no longer needed. And then he believed. Thank you. This one is an extraordinary image. It's the image of a serpent belt from Mexico. And it might remind you of all the images in Irish iconography and artwork of the serpent. All around, the serpent appears all around the Book of Kells, double-headed, together in so many different ways that has never really been explored, I don't think, academically or as to what its significance might have been. Thank you. This is an image of how we've used the Chris at our Bridget festivals. 2 women hold it, and a person comes through, turning left. They get rid of all the disappointments that they might have had or all the bad feeling that they might have had. Then they go through it again, and they give thanks and gratitude for all of they have received in the past year. And in the final movement, they come through the Chris and make commitments, personal, communal, and cosmic, to the year to come. Thank you. The final image is a small little Chris. It's a belt, and some of you would be familiar with these because you use them in school. But sometimes the saints used to wear these belts around their waists, and they became very important relics in the times to come. Thank you, Benny. Okay, so where does the Chris come in with Bridget? There's only really one reference to the Chris in the lives of Bridget, when there was a poor woman and she didn't know how to earn a living. And Bridget said, I'll give you a cow. And she said, there's no point in you giving me a cow because the robbers would just come and take it. And she said, okay, well, here's my girdle. And you can use that to earn a living. And so she did then for the rest of her life. Another saint called Sapphon They were felling a tree and it was going in the wrong direction. So, she came up and put her girdle on it and brought, it fell in the right direction. Manana, another saint, she was going off to make a new foundation, and she wanted a beautiful young nun to stay and guard the place. And she said, it's not safe for me to do that, because I'll be attacked. And so Manana used her kris to turn Orbail into a wizened old woman, so that she would no longer be attractive to anybody and she would be safe in the convent. And as we've seen, the Virgin Mary sent her girdle down to doubting Thomas. But the girdle is an image all around the world, like the Virgin of Guadalupe. The black belt is referred to as a maternity belt. And in 2011, even in communist Russia, or what we call communist Russia, 500,000 Russians queued up to see the belt of the Virgin Mary. And so it's a very ancient symbol with cellular memories. Now, there are many types of christina. Again, the personal one is this little one I have here, which was made for me in Canada, which you can wear around your neck. And that's a personal one. There's a communal sense of a kris, which is mostly forms in the dance. And in many indigenous cultures, you'll find that the dancing, the labyrinth, the kris is a form of remaking or making the serpent. And then there's the cosmic ritual, or the cosmic ritual of the kris, which is the one that we use at our Bridget festivals. The kris is used in many, many different ways. We call it a kris or a belt or a girdle. In some cultures, a soul cloth is given at birth to a child, and that soul cloth accompanies them all through their lives. In other cultures, a belt is given at initiation to both women and men, signifying that they're now grown up and they have to take on the responsibilities of being an adult. It's also a courting sign, so that a young woman who decides, okay, I'm ready to go out there and see what my fate is, will wear a belt in a particular kind of a way. And there's a Latvian little ditty that says, the man is saying to the young woman, turn your back, young maiden, so that I can see if the ends of your belt are bushy. If they are, you will be my bride. The belt was also used in marriage ceremonies, where it was twisted so that each end of the belt, the couple was joined together using the belt. It was used in midwifery. There's a very good article by somebody called Walter Dilling, who wrote it at the beginning of the 20th century. And he was a doctor, and he was called to a very difficult delivery, and he didn't really think the delivery was going to happen. So he and his pals went off to have a drink. But meanwhile, a neighbor had come along with a big belt and fastened it around a woman. And so by the time they had their drink taken, they came back and the woman had safely delivered. So he was beginning to think, maybe there's a little bit more to this than I thought. And he went off on an anthropological search to find out what it was all about. Now, the saints, many saints, other saints had, the belt. Also, Saint Margaret of Antioch was very popular because she was said to be appealed to in childbirth. And the reason they thought she was a good subject for this was she was once swallowed by a dragon, but she managed to escape from the belly of the dragon. And so the thought went on that if she managed to escape from the belly of the dragon, she'd be a good saint to appeal to for a woman in childbirth, so that she'd have an easy delivery. And many other saints, including Gobnet. Gobnet also had a length of ribbon. In St. Margaret's case, they used to make a ribbon around the girth of the woman who was pregnant, and then at the end, they would give the umbilical cord back to St. Margaret, the same length as the cord that they had that she had blessed already for safe delivery. What she did with the umbilical cord, I don't know. They didn't tell us that. The other thing that they used for the kris was expelling a dead fetus. As you know, if a woman had an unfortunate pregnancy and the fetus died, it could mean that she could die also if she was not able to expel it. And so very often they would get a snake skin and wrap it around the woman in a kind of imitative magic, so that, again, on the grounds that if the snake could shed its skin every year and still survive, this might encourage the woman to be able to expel a dead fetus. And apparently it did work long before cesarean operations were called. There's one incident where Saint Melania and her group of virgins arrived just as a surgeon was about to perform a cesarean operation. It would have killed the woman, but it would have saved the child. And it was a choice of, the woman was going to die anyway. But Melania arrived with her girdle, tied her girdle around the woman, and she saved the woman's life. In some cultures, once a woman becomes pregnant, she is given a girdle, and she wraps it around her body 3 times. But again, in the Latvian tradition, when the woman is about to give birth, she loosens the belt, and there are 9 folds in the belt, and she says, "I had a colourful belt with 9 folds. When the 9th popped, then off to Perth. Ouch, ouch, ouch." She was off to the sauna where she was going to give birth. The birthing belt was hung on the rafters to help the woman deliver, as you saw in the picture by Bonnie Hicks. It was also used in funeral rites. So the chairperson of, for instance, of Women's Spirit Ireland, when she was dying, I put the kris around her in the bed, preparing her for her soul to leave her body. And I did, it was an intuitive thing to do. I didn't have any sense that this was an ancient ritual, but it turned out that it was. So very often when we do these things, we get in touch with cellular memories that we wouldn't otherwise have consciously had. The kris now is made of very many different kinds of things. The most popular would be of straw, or the oat straw particularly, or rushes, or in recent times we've started to make them from sheep's wool or linen, or even the snake skin. In some cases, they're made of human hair or even animal's hair. And Christina, which is the plural, are decorated in many different ways in different cultures. In Ireland, we've seen that the kris usually has 3 crosses attached to it. In some cases, it's shellfish. In some cases, it's the teeth of a bear, the teeth of children, or hare's feet, whatever image happens to be important for that particular culture. In some cases, they weave into it the maternal line. There's the grandmother, there's the mother, there's the baby, and then it's a kind of continual artifact that passes from generation to generation. So what does the kris mean? What does the belt mean? And why does it have such an important part to play in these Indigenous ceremonies? Again, Patrick banished the snakes from Ireland, or so we're told, but he didn't get as far as Scotland, thanks be to the Lord, because the women in Scotland kept on the traditions. You see, some of these guys never got up to the islands or down to the mountains. And a guy called Alexander Carmichael went up to Scotland and watched what the women did. And they put a sock, embers of a fire into the sock, and they got the sock and they banged on the ground and they said, "Today is the day of bride. The serpent shall come from the hole. I will not molest the serpent, nor will the serpent molest me. This is the day of bride. The queen will come from the mound. I will not touch the queen, nor will the queen touch me." In other words, what she was doing was waking the earth. Okay, earth, it's time to get up. It's time to wake up. And she was waking the Njart, as we try to do in our Imbolc ceremonies. Scandinavian cultures have a similar rite, but they whip a bear skin in the snow. In the Roman rites, which are a bit more problematic, some of the young men whip the women with the februm. And the februm, of course, gives its name to February, and it formed part of the Lupercalia presentations. Now, the serpent represents in almost all cultures around the world. It represents the Njart, it represents the chi, it represents the life force, the divine vibrations. And in many of the ancient old European cultures, the serpent was always around the tree of life. You can see this in the embroideries that are still extant. You can see images of the belt. We couldn't show you too many of them today because it would have taken up all the time, but they're around the tree of life, often with the image of Adam and Eve. And they often show women in different stages of life. In Greek times, Plato talked about the belt of heaven. He didn't necessarily, refer to the serpent, but he was very much aware that there was a belt all around heaven. And the other possible, interpretation is Orion. Now, I have to, do a lot more work on the implications of Orion, because Orion was very important in the lunar calendar, but not so much in the later ones. But the first image that Benny showed you of the ancient statue with the belt around the hips showed 3 large buttons. And in the Irish version, there's 3 large crosses. In other versions, they have different images. But what it really represents when you wear that belt is an attempt to become, again, in alignment at that time of the year with Orion, becoming in alignment with the cosmos. And so, once again, I want to say that, this is not about worshiping Bridget or anybody else. It's about alignment. It's about personal alignment. It's about communal alignment. And finally, the belt is a symbol of cosmic alignment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. That was so rich. Much to digest. And Sally Ann is going to take us into physical action now, which will be interesting for us to be working with our hands while we're digesting these images. So over to you, Sally Ann.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Mary. I'm trusting that most of you, if not all of you, have managed to secure your lengths of material. So we have 3 different lengths of scarves, sarongs, or just length of fabric. And we're going to take the 3 and just tie a knot at the top here. And then I'm going to direct the making towards the screen, but I'm going to invite each one of you to just find your own ease with the making. So whether you make it towards the screen like me or towards yourself, whether you're sitting down, standing, whatever you need to do. Now, we're going to be working with our dexterity, our lovely finger gestures. So really give them a little bit of exercise. And now the kind of, there's a particular rhythm that we've settled on in our making when we were practicing. And that's another thing I just want to name, that we've practiced and some of you may not have practiced. So just take your ease with this. There's no pressure. You'll get to where you need to be in your own time. I'm just going to pull back a little bit so you can see the beginning of the braiding. So we're taking, and again, you might work from the other direction, but we're taking the length of material from the right outside towards the center. From the left outside towards the center. From the right outside towards the center. And from the left outside towards the center. We're moving from outside towards the center every time. And again, just finding your own speed and rhythm with this, but I'm going to just stand up now because it's easier for me to get into my own rhythm when I'm standing. So left outside towards the center and right outside towards the center. So just really pay attention to your breathing. Bring as much of your body into this this making, this braiding, this plaiting as you can. And you might just allow yourself to feel the texture and the touch of the fabric on your own skin. And that might help if there's a little bit of activation around making. That might really help you to settle down, along with staying connected to your breath. And as I'm breathing and plotting away here, I'm also aware that of a felt sense memory of my own hair being braided when I was a child, of my grandmother braiding my hair, of my mother braiding my hair, and sisters and friends braiding one another's hair. And you might also have that memory, and it's a felt sense memory. It's in the tissue, so it truly is still alive in us. Or you might have a memory of braiding your own daughter or granddaughter's hair. And as I'm with these three strands and finding my rhythm in the making, I'm also the possibility of putting an intention into each one of these strands. What is my intention for myself in this moment as the new life gathers strength and momentum? What is my intention for my community, my family at this time? And what's my intention in relation to what's happening in the world at this time? And when we've reached a certain point, and you won't be finished, but nonetheless, let's just take the kris and begin to wrap it around our pelvis. But you might want to just hold it there for a while and just yield into the support that the kris is offering in this moment. Finding your ease with it, staying in your body, staying in your breath. And then when you're ready, and it's, you're finding the right position for it on your hips, we'll just tie a knot and possibly even a second one in order to secure the kris. Now you can really feel into this lovely woven belt that allows us to really settle into our pelvis a little bit more. And it's helping us to define our pelvis, helping us to define the pelvis that offers us a sense of containment, a sense of protection perhaps. And really, really noticing what it is you're aware of in yourself as you allow the felt sense of this kris, this belt, to support you in this moment. And of course, it brings in our bellies as well. And so that whole delicious area of pelvis and belly is very much in focus right now. And you might like to consider the possibility of the pelvic bowl and this liquid gold that you're swishing and moving around at the base as you drop further and further into your pelvis and hips. And a natural rhythm and momentum will come in. And we can invite you to repeat that gesture of the making. From the outside towards the center, from the outside towards the center. So we have our pelvic girdle, and we're now inviting in our shoulder girdle to participate. This lovely, delicious, natural rhythm. It feels very serpentine. And as Mary mentioned, the serpent is the symbol of regeneration. So we're really inviting in a felt sense of what the life force feels like moving through our bodies, especially into our hips and our pelvis. And of course, this again is the center for creativity and sensuality and nourishment and healing. And Bene, if you're okay to put on some music. So we're going to invite a little bit more fire into this lovely hip movement. This movement back and forth. now we can take a few moments to just settle, catch our breath, have a sip of water, and back to you, Marion.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Beautiful, feeling that serpentine energy, so needed at this time of the year. Gorgeous. Mary's going to talk to us now about the Bridget's cross and the symbol of the cross in our indigenous wisdoms throughout the world. Avoira.
Thank you. And Benny, you're going to show us an image? Yes. This is a beautiful Bridget's cross that Fionnuala has made. And Fionnuala will be speaking about and showing us how to make those crosses in just a few minutes. But I just wanted to show that one in particular to give you a sense of the kind of cross we are speaking of. So thank you, Benny. So what does the cross actually mean? Again, in the Christian tradition, we're used to thinking of the cross and the crucified Christ. But again, the image of the cross went way, way, way back before that. The cross represents the tree of life. It's the axis mundi. It communicates between the three levels of the cosmos, the subterranean space, the earth, and the sky. And it provides access to the invisible. The tree of life is usually placed beside wells. And as you know, in the Bridget wells, whenever we go, there's a tree there and we place cluties. Cluties are called ribbons and rags and images, asking for protection for our loved ones or to be healed from illness. Another interpretation of the cross is the eye goddess. Again, many cultures have that image of the eye goddess. And there's a very famous story told of the Cailleach. The Cailleach, she was once asked, how do you, somebody said, what's the origin of the world? And she said, sure, I haven't a clue. I don't know. Why don't you go and ask the eagle? And the eagle said, sure, I don't know either. But go down there and ask the otter, because the otter was, has made an impression in the stone. He's been there for so long. So he went down and asked the otter, and the otter said, sure, I don't know either. Your best bet is to go down and ask the salmon. And he went down to the salmon. And of course, in Ireland, the salmon is the salmon of knowledge who knows everything. And the salmon says, well, I'm not all that sure, but I will tell you that when I was in the ice, one time a bird came down and plucked out my eye, and the blood from my eye melted the ice. And that was the beginning. That was the first day of the world. And so the Cailleach and the eye and plucking out the eye is a very familiar symbol around all of these stories. Like in the lives of St. Bridget, when her father and her brothers decided that she'd make a good marriage prospect, she took one look at them and she said, well, now, she pulled out her eye. And she said, now nobody's going to like me now. And the brothers were appalled at this, and the blood was flowing from her eye, and the blood that flowed from her eye caused, again, it flowed into the rushes. She plucked the rushes to bathe her eye, and there again was a well. So the connection between the cross and the eye and the well and the rushes is ancient, and it goes back in very many different kind of ways. Also in the northern tradition, Odin, when he wanted wisdom, he had to give up his eye. Okay, you can have wisdom, but give up one eye, because knowledge or wisdom has to be paid for. Another story about St. Bridget concerns a nun called Daritha or Etha. And she was blind, and she asked Bridget to make her to be able to see again. And Bridget went over, blessed her, and of course she could see again. And then Ita thought about this for another little while, and she said, actually, I could see much better when I didn't have the eye. So could you please reverse the procedure and give me back, my blindness, which meant that, her seeing was a different kind of a seeing than visual. And she preferred the kind of seeing that she could see, is some kind of a shamanic seeing that she could see without her eye. In another case, the eye is the eye of discernment, because again, Bridget went for a meal one time, but when she looked around, there was a nun, and she could see a devil inside her because she had the acute eye of discernment. The cross is also used for warding off the evil eye. One of the stories I like best about the cross, though, is and its relationship to all of this is the crime of the eye in Brehon law. In Brehon law, if someone sees a crime being committed and does nothing about it, they are as guilty as the perpetrator. That is called the crime of the eye. And can you imagine what might have happened over the last couple of hundred years of Irish history if the crime of the eye had been given the prominence that it should have been given? Most of us are like the three monkeys. We hear, see, and do no evil. But the crime of the eye, we need to return to that we are as guilty as the perpetrator if we sit around and we do nothing. And so traditionally, the crosses are made by people before Imbolc, and the weaving of the cross is about weaving fate. You might be weaving the fate, again, thinking of the coming year. We are remembering the dead. And normally the crosses are placed in byres, the pigsties, the cowsheds, and they're put over the hearth to protect the house from fire. In some cultures, they're put under the bed of a young married couple in order to encourage them to become fertile. Now, there are many types of crosses, and again, time doesn't allow us to show you all of them, but the original cross was the swastika. We can see that again in ancient embroidery. It was abused by the Nazis. They appropriated it because they knew what a powerful symbol it was and what kind of cellular memories it would have evoked. But the right facing, if the swastika goes to right, as it were, clockwise, it represents the male. If it goes leftwise, it represents the female. So the hooked lozenge or the hooked swastika is a very clear fertility sign. The other interpretation of the cross is that it's the eye of the sun. It represents the one-eyed, it represents the all-knowing eye, and it represents the sun's passage through the earth where it leaves seeds of its heat and light in the subterranean rock from which one can reproduce heat. It's the rays of the sun, because as you'll see when Fionnuala is showing you the weaving, it's a beautiful image of rays going in every direction. The four corners, each cross in Ireland, there are many different types of crosses made, and we're not altogether sure yet how the different types came into Ireland. But the four-pronged cross usually represents the four corners of the cosmos. As I said, in later times, it signified the Christian cross. And in the middle of the cross, you'll see a very intricate woven center. And in some cultures, in Ireland, for instance, they would put a potato in the middle of that woven center and plant it in the fields to encourage the fertility of the fields. In some cases, some cultures consider it to be the vulvic center, and they place seeds in the middle of the cross in order to encourage fertility. But again, we're not talking about, fertility only in the literal sense. We're talking about personal fertility, that one becomes creative and fertile rather than dead to life. We're talking about communal fertility, that the cross represents our ability to give life to the community, and it represents cosmic fertility, that we are committed to cosmic fertility and the continuation of the earth, which is under so much threat at the moment from climate change. So thank you, and over to Fionnuala.
Lovely. Thank you, Mary. That was really great. I was there with you, thinking of climate change and that cosmic reach again and alignment. Thank you for that. So Fionnuala now is going to share some of her talents to help us to see how to make a cross. Fionnula.
So just beginning with this particular cross, just to have a look. 2 sticks crossing and interwoven with straw or yarn. And here we have the eye. And this was the most widespread cross in Ireland, Bridget's cross, in the 1940s, when the Irish Folklore Commission was collecting artifacts of country life. This eye or sun symbol is at the center again of the 3-cornered cross, which is really like a symbol of the triple goddess. So I've been to the wetlands this morning, and I've got my bundle of rushes from root to tip, so it's more than 1 meter long. And I've cut these into 40 centimeter lengths. So here are our lovely, fat, juicy rushes, and I'm going to take 2 and squeezing, folding and passing over one over the other and turn, holding the folded rush and turn. And again, I squeeze, pass under, hold the last rush and turn. Squeeze, pass under, hold the last rush and turn. And again. So my family, my mother, my grandmother, my ancestors were all town people, and we lost the tradition of making Bridget's crosses. And it wasn't until we moved to the country, when I was about 7, that I saw a Bridget's cross. A local man saw that my mother didn't have a Bridget's cross in the house. So he arrived with armloads of rushes and spread them all over the kitchen and proceeded to make a cross for my mother. And this Bridget's cross went on to the kitchen wall, over the kitchen door, and that was the blessing of our house. So when we moved house, that same faded, dusty cross came with us. So even though we didn't make them, we valued them. So we valued this cross. So the blessing we make when we're putting up a cross on the wall at Imbolc is, Bridget, save us from fever, fire, and famine. Bridget, save us from fever, fire, and famine. And how appropriate that blessing is even in these, particularly in these days of ours. So Imbolc was a time of new beginnings, and at that time you could mend disputes and heal relationships. And a lovely story was told at one of the earliest Bridget workshops by a woman called Una Doherty. And she told this story, her family story. Her father had had a falling out with a neighbour. All through the winter, he was waiting for Bridget's day to come. And when the time came, he started making a special cross. And it was like Sally Ann was saying, putting intention into the weaving. And as he made the cross, he told the story of this neighbour's life in such a way that all the bitterness fell away and some kind of healing happened. And next day he brought the cross over to the neighbour's house, and the 2 families were reconciled. So I'm just going to finish off the cross now by trimming the ends and fastening them off with an elastic band. This is the modern solution. You'll see in the slides that I've used the old way of binding with the soft rush itself, but that it takes a little bit of time. And, so I measure the length of the limb of the cross by about a hand's breadth. And the final one. Old woman is watching over you in the darkness of the storm. She is watching. She is weaving, mending, gathering the fragments. She is watching over you. So weave and mend, gather the fragments safe and win the sacred circle, sisters. Weave and mend, oh women, weave and mend. For years I've been watching, waiting for old woman, feeling lost and so alone. I've been waiting. Now I find her weaving, gathering the colors. Now I find her in myself. So weave and mend, gather the fragments safe and win the sacred circle, sisters. Weave and mend, oh women, weave and mend.
Ramila Margaret, Janula, it was really beautiful. Thank you. So just taking a moment, everybody, to be with weave of the music, weave of story, weave of images that we're absorbing and taking in. Maybe just looking around your own space again, just giving yourself just those seconds away from the screen. The last bit of light in the day, if you're living in the west coast of Ireland, it may be morning elsewhere, maybe midnight in other countries. Taking a moment to let your eyes take in what's around you, just to rest for a moment. Something calls them, or maybe just an object that captures your eyes' attention. Just resting there. We're going to go back to Mary, who's going to speak to us about our last symbol today. We're going to look at the broth and a little bit of snowdrop talk. So Mary, back to you.
Thank you. And Bene is going to show us again some images. The cloak is a very famous image of Bridget. I've already mentioned that the Cailleach created the world using the cloak. In this case, Mary's cloak encompasses people of all races, creeds, colours, and sexual orientation. Thank you. Thanks, Benny. And this is another one where the cloak is spread out all over the world and people of all races are welcome. In that sense, it's a cloak of mercy. And it's surrounded by, maybe in this particular image, by the Chris, because all of these images are interrelated. And the final image here is the image of Kuan Yin, because we don't have an image of Bridget doing this, but the cloak also absorbs, is set out on the eve of Imbolc, and it's put out on the grass in order to absorb the dew, and the dew is the dew of mercy. So thank you, Benny. So the cloak is one of the important images of Bridget, and there are actually remaining relics of Bridget. In fact, there's relics of all of the artifacts we've talked about. There are relics of the belt and all sorts of stuff that I wouldn't have had time to have gone into today. But the relic of Bridget's cloak is said to be held in Bruges in the Cathedral of Saint-Sauveur. In the Irish traditions, the cloak is said to guard against misfortune, to preserve virginity, or promote fertility. In other words, whatever you decide to do or would like to do, the cloak is said to help. Again, in one of our Bridget festivals, we used to have the Minescar and Athenry, and a woman told a great story of her granny, because she used to remember that after Bridget's day, the cloak might be cut up and sent around to the neighbours or friends. But her granny always had a little bird between her breasts because she raised chickens. And if any chicken looked like it wasn't going to make it, she'd wrap it in a little piece of the broth and place it between her breasts for warmth. So her chirping granny came to life in her stories. It's also used by prophets, poets, and shamans to achieve mantic ecstasy. And similar stories, again, are told of female and male deities around the world. One of the important parts of the cloak for me was at one of the Bridget festivals, I'd heard about a young woman who had been sexually abused, and brutally abused at that. And so I got a cloak. I got a beautiful cerise cloak and made of mohair, and wove into it the sun, moon, and the stars for this young woman. And then I gave it to her. And every time she felt, that she might want to be cutting or do whatever she wanted to do in a self-destructive way, she would put the cloak around her with the candle, and she'd wrap herself as a form. It was a kind of containment, containing herself within Bridget's cloak. So the cloak is also a maternal signifier. It's used in the lives of saints and heroes. It's used to quell violence. It's used to make the heroes forget what they were fighting about. It's used to make them invisible so they can't see each other. And also, anybody who wore a cloak in battle, if they were related in the maternal line to 7 degrees, they could not kill each other. So it was also a very important piece of protection. But for me, one of the most important parts of the cloak is the dew of mercy, because a lot of my work is critiquing the way sacrifice in the main monotheistic religions of empire split the world between those who are saved and not saved, between the infidels and the heretics, between you name it. Sacrifice is a device for splitting, and I know that's controversial, and I can't say any more about that at this point. But what I'm trying to do is to recuperate the other tradition, which is the dew of mercy. And you'll find in the Hebrew tradition, when Adam was dying, he'd been cast out of the Garden of Paradise, but he was dying, and he said to his son, Seth, would you mind going back into the garden, see if you can get back into the Garden of Paradise and collect some of the dew of mercy and bring it home, bring it back to me, because I know I'll be healed if you give it back to me, if you bring it back. And Seth tried to do it, but he wasn't able to, and so Adam died. So the dew of mercy and the dew of life is an important, again, another symbol of regeneration. But in the religions of empire, as opposed to the indigenous traditions that we are trying to recuperate by doing this kinds of work, It is the blood of sacrifice, which is the important fluid, rather than the dew of mercy. And so we need to recuperate that for ourselves. So just summarizing, the cloak is the cosmic cloak, which symbolizes in some ways the heavens, the containment of the heavens. The cross is the earthly symbol. It's the symbol of the tree of life. And the serpent and the Chris represents the body. It's the DNA. The serpent represents the DNA, as you know, from the symbols of Asclepius in the healing tradition. And so one of the things that we try to do in our Bridget festivals, and that the Body Soul tradition in particular is brilliant at doing, is bringing consciousness down to the cellular level in order to bring about what we call defocalization. In other words, getting out of our heads and getting back to the ancestral memories and getting back in touch with the language of the body, which many feminist scholars have talked about for a long time, but we haven't really found a way of doing that. But I would just finally say that the Body Soul tradition is one way in which we can do that. So the final image is the image of the snowdrop. And for me, I always thought about the snowdrop as being the tears of snow, and or the tears of God, or the tears of snow. And I'm not sure linguistically that that's correct, but that is okay. But in the Scottish tradition, there's a story about a struggle that went on between the Cailleach and Bridget, because the Cailleach didn't want to give up her reign. She was the head of winter, and Bridget was the up and coming bride of spring. The Cailleach was reluctant to give up her reign. And so Father Winter came over to Bride, because she's called Bride in Scotland, and he handed her a cloak, and then he asked her to take what's in his other hand, a bunch of snowdrops. And this is what he told her. He said, if the Cailleach scolds you, hand her these flowers, and if she asks where you found them, tell her that they came from the green, rustling fir woods. Tell her also that the cress is springing up on the bank of streams, and that the new grass has begun to shoot up in the fields. In other words, her time has come. It's time for Bridget. Thank you, and hand you back to Marion.
Mille buíochas. That's lovely, Mary. Thank you again. So it's quite something moving from these symbols that are so powerful, and each of them could really take our time to absorb and to drop into. But it's a gift really that we have with these 2 hours, just to evoke the memory and to feel into the kind of global consciousness that they're awakening. And this time we're handing over to Abigail, who will take us into the local wisdom here of what we do with the broth or the cloak in Ireland.
Okay. Thanks, Marion. So here we are with the broth. Here's our broth. Can everybody see there? We have 3 meters of this really thick red material. And we're going to put it over ourselves here. So just really noticing what it's like to be under the broth. So just an invitation to everybody. If you have a piece of material near you to throw, just putting it over your head right now. So we're really dropping in an image of the broth and the beautiful symbols that Mary spoke to. The containment. So imagining 150 or so of us on the call this evening or in the morning, wherever you are in the world. So really feeling that containment, that image of this broth wrapped around all of us, all 150 of us on the call. And, you know, we're living through a pandemic. So it's just a beautiful image to have us connected under the broth, under Vrothfried. And it's like we're wired, our nervous systems are wired for connection, and we've had to be apart for the past year since the last Bridget's Day. Do you know? It's like we've been seeing each other as threat and having to stay 2 meters apart and wear masks. We're missing extended family, and we're missing our friends, we're missing hugs and touch. So really dropping into that containment under the wrath this evening or this morning. And the other image is the inclusivity. So it's like we're all under the wrath. Nobody's left out. There's space for us all here. So no matter what your race, your gender, your sexuality, everybody's in under the wrath. And we're going to work with the wrath. I videotaped myself putting out our wrath overnight to gather the dew, that sacred juice from the earth, the new life, the nyarth coming in. And the chant that you might want to sing along with at home is Phui Vrat Vride Shing. We're all gathered under Bridget's cloak. Phui Vrat Vride Shing. Phui Vrat Vride Shing. Phui Vrat Vride Shing. There's our snowdrop and the Vrat. So the little snowdrop, the first brave soul out over the earth after the cold, hard winter. And that gorgeous image that Marion brought in from the poem, risk joy in the raw wind of the new world. So the tradition with the Vrat, when they bring it in the morning and it was sometimes soaked from rain and dew, or it could be a frosty night, so it would be like a board, carrying a board in and then cutting it up. So I have some pieces here from other Vrats in other years that we've put out. So there we are. So that's the one that Mary was talking to, putting the bit of the Vrat down, the granny from Kirkaguina, putting it down her chest, down her vest with the chickens. So putting it in the house for sick animals or sick humans, and bringing in a bit of healing and a bit of blessing. And then the other one that I love is getting the embers from the fire the next morning and putting them in the sock, and then beating the earth. Dúshig, dúshig, wake up, waking up the nyarth. So that's our image and our Vrat Vride. And we're all under Bridget's cloak. So back to Mary.
Beautiful, Abigail. Thank you. I can feel the fire or the heat that's come in with all the beautiful singing and images and stories. Really the nourishment for us. And the nourishment is there at the transition of the year's turning, to bring us into the next season. That Imbolc is that transition. So I would like to say that it's been a great honor to be part of this team, and a real delight and a joy to share what is such a resource for many of us. And I give great thanks for that and gratitude. So I'd like to read again our poem from Louise Gluck, and we'll send all these resources out to you, the songs and the poems. Do you know what I was, how I lived? You know what despair is. Then winter should have meaning for you. I did not expect to survive, earth suppressing me. I didn't expect to waken again, to feel in damp earth my body able to respond again, remembering after so long how to open again in the cold light of earliest spring. Afraid, yes, but among you again crying yes, risk joy in the raw wind of the new world. So we take our candle, our lasser breed, and the blessing that we say when we walk through the Chris, Godugga breed, Slán doing. The breed will give us health. Godugga she Nyart doing, but she gives us that life force. Agus Godugga she Spraga doing, that she'll give us inspiration. So invoking these three, we blow our candles out and we send the energy to those in our hearts and to those we wish healing to. And in particular for the world that's hit by so many really, really tough limitations of pandemic and the economic fallout of that and social circumstance for so many people. And we've mentioned already our climate, our beloved earth. So sending with grace blessings from our candles. There's a song that we often sing at the very end of our gatherings, and it can be pretty riotous, so it's not very fun to sing it on my own, and I've been debating or not whether I'll go for it. But if Bene puts the words up, which she's done beautifully on a slide earlier, I'll give it a go, as they say. I'm pretty croaky. Loud are the bells of Norwich, and the people come and go. Here by the Tower of Julian, I'll tell them what I know. Ring out, bells of Norwich, and let the winter come and go. All shall be well again, I know. Love, like the yellow daffodil, is coming through the snow. Love, like the yellow daffodil, it touches all I know. Ring out, bells of Norwich, and let the winter come and go. All shall be well again, I know. Ring for the yellow daffodil, a flower in the snow. Ring for the yellow daffodil and tell them all I know. Ring out, bells of Norwich, and let the winter come and go. All shall be well again, I know. All shall be well, I'm telling you, let the winter come and go. All shall be well again, I know.